On a warm and radiant afternoon in Dakar, where the Atlantic breeze carries the smell of salt and freedom, President Faye stood before the Senegalese people and the world, poised to make a statement that would echo far beyond the borders of his West African nation. It was not merely a speech, it was a declaration of sovereignty, a break from a long and painful history that had shackled the soul of Senegal to foreign powers. With resolute clarity and a firm voice that resonated with both defiance and dignity, he announced that Senegal would begin the process of removing all remaining French military bases from its territory. The statement struck like thunder across the Francophone world, but it was not an impulsive gesture. It was the culmination of decades of discontent, buried beneath layers of diplomatic smiles and economic agreements, the weight of colonial legacies, still pressing on the chest of an independent nation. Since gaining independence in 1960, Senegal has walked the tightrope of maintaining cordial relations with its former colonial master, France. It had hosted French troops, French companies, French diplomats, enduring their presence as part of an uneasy arrangement that many generations were told was necessary for security and stability. However, the reality beneath the surface told another story. France's military footprint in Senegal was not just symbolic of cooperation. It was an ever-present reminder that true freedom had yet to be achieved. Generations of Senegalese children had grown up seeing French flags waving over military installations in their cities. Many questioned how a nation could call itself independent while foreign boots still trampled its soil in the name of an alliance. Those questions grew louder over the years, particularly as other nations in the region, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, began to sever similar ties and take bold steps toward reclaiming their destinies. President Faye, a man deeply attuned to the pulse of his people and the rhythms of Africa's evolving spirit, had long sensed the growing hunger for complete sovereignty. In countless conversations with elders, activists, students, and military leaders, he heard the same refrain: "We are not free if we are not in control of our land." The youth of Senegal, armed with smartphones and historical awareness, were especially vocal. They no longer wanted to be passengers in their own country's journey. They demanded to be the drivers of change. So when Faye made his announcement, it was not a surprise. It was the fulfillment of a rising tide. His government began coordinating with the French authorities to organize a phased withdrawal. The old colonial barracks, once bustling with foreign soldiers, would soon be emptied, and their echoes would be filled with the voices of Senegalese soldiers trained to defend not just borders, but identity, dignity, and self-determination. International reactions were swift and divided. French media outlets bristled with skepticism and concern. French officials expressed regret and hinted at the strategic disadvantages this withdrawal would pose. European analysts warned of a security vacuum in West Africa, but in Senegal, the announcement was met with jubilation. In the neighborhoods of Pekin, Guédiawaye, and Saint-Louis, crowds gathered to celebrate. Drummers played into the night, griots recited epic poems of liberation, and women danced with joy and tears in their eyes. Elders whispered blessings for a future they never thought they'd see. Yet President Faye knew that removing the French military was only one part of the broader mission. True decolonization could not be achieved through symbolic gestures alone. It demanded the reclamation of history, language, economy, education, and identity. The struggle was not just about sovereignty over land, it was about sovereignty over narrative. In this spirit, Faye's administration launched a series of bold initiatives aimed at rewriting the colonial storylines that had long dominated Senegalese institutions. The national curriculum was overhauled to center African history from African perspectives. No longer would children learn about their ancestors through the lens of foreign conquerors. They would learn about resistance heroes like Lat Dior Diop, Aline Sito Diatta and Samori Touré, not as footnotes in European conquest stories, but as the protagonists of their own people's epic struggle. Museums and cultural centers were reinvigorated. Artifacts long stolen and held in European vaults were demanded back, and France, under growing international pressure, began returning some of the looted treasures. These weren't just objects. They were fragments of a soul that had been scattered across continents. Each mask, each sculpture, each sacred object returned was an act of spiritual restoration. President Faye emphasized that reclaiming culture was as crucial as reclaiming land. Economically, the government pursued bold reforms. New trade agreements were signed with countries across the continent and beyond, aiming to reduce France's dependence. The CFA franc, long a source of economic control wielded by France over its former colonies, came under scrutiny, with Faye's team exploring alternative monetary frameworks that would restore financial autonomy. Local industries were given priority in government contracts, and initiatives to support homegrown entrepreneurs and farmers were implemented nationwide. These efforts stirred immense pride across Senegal, but they also encountered resistance from entrenched interests. Elements within the political and economic elite, who had long benefited from their proximity to French power, raised objections. Western diplomats and consultants warned of instability, but the people stood firm behind their leader. The streets bore murals of Faye alongside quotes about sovereignty and African pride. In cafes, barbershops, and classrooms, debates flourished. But the prevailing sentiment was clear. It was time for Africa to walk its own path, unburdened by the shadows of empires. Meanwhile, the spiritual transformation of Senegal was also underway. Faye encouraged religious leaders to reflect on the intersection of faith and freedom. He supported interfaith dialogues that promoted unity and resilience. Sufi orders, long central to Senegalese spiritual life, began organizing conferences on decolonial ethics, encouraging followers to blend inner liberation with national liberation. In mosques and churches alike, prayers were offered not just for peace, but for courage, the courage to build anew. Senegal's bold steps reverberated across Africa. In neighboring countries, civil society groups held marches of solidarity. Artists composed songs and poems in honor of the Senegalese example. For many across the continent, Dakar became a symbol of what was possible when a nation dared to believe in itself. President Faye traveled to other African capitals, sharing Senegal's experience and advocating for a Pan-African future rooted in cooperation, dignity, and mutual respect. He met with leaders from East, Central, and Southern Africa, championing a continental renaissance that did not seek to imitate Western models, but to forge a new African paradigm based on ancestral wisdom, modern innovation, and sovereign unity. And through it all, President Faye remained grounded in the wisdom of the elders. He often quoted the Wolof proverb, "Ku mana dem bu demul mu xam ne demul." He who can walk and does not walk is the one we know cannot walk. It was a reminder that Senegal had always had the power to stand on its own feet. It only needed to believe. By the time the last French soldier departed Senegalese soil, the nation had already begun to write a new chapter. It was a chapter of reclamation and rebirth, a testament to what could be achieved when courage outpaces fear. For President Faye and for millions of Senegalese, it was not just the end of a military arrangement, it was the long-awaited dawn of true independence. And as the sun set over Dakar that historic evening, casting golden light over the now empty French base turned into a Senegalese civic center, the air was filled not with the sound of orders in a foreign tongue, but with the laughter of children playing freely under the watchful gaze of ancestors. Finally at rest. If all African leaders will step up and make a difference, Africa will be a much more better place for all who believe in Africa without too many talks. Long live African leaders.